Welcome on in to Tossin the Pigskin, NFL Draft Edition. I'm your host, Nate Smith. Believe it or not, folks, the draft is just over a month away, and we can't wait. Today, we'll be breaking down the hottest wide receiver prospects and which team desperately needs to draft one. Stay tuned for what we think. Here we go! I'm joined alongside Nick Frias and Jenna Ortiz. So, guys, we'll get right into it. Looking at the wide receiver prospects as a whole, Nick, I'll start with you. Who's your favorite prospect that's coming out of the draft this year?
So personally, my favorite prospect is one that didn't quite have very good quarterbacks going out of college, and it's Courtland Sutton out of SMU. He's a big receiver. He's 6'3", 6'4", depending on who is measuring him, and he's definitely not scared of taking hits at all. He's been hit by guys all of his career, and he's still made the catch. He's almost like a tight end, although not quite that big. And he's got a huge vertical. He was measured at about 36 inches with his vertical, which was one of the bigger ones in the combine. And even though he had a very bad quarterback this year and hasn't had a great quarterback so far in his college career, he still had over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns this upcoming previous season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always is interesting when you see that a lot in college sometimes with receivers and even other positions where they have extreme talent, but sometimes the quarterback or another position is, hindering them from maybe reaching their full potential. So I agree with you. I think he can be special at the next level. Jenna, who is your pick for your favorite prospect coming into the draft?
My favorite prospect would be Christian Kirk from Texas A&M.
Okay.
He's one of the top route receivers in the draft who's available. He also is really good if they want to have someone come in for returns.
Yeah.
Because he had 6 punt return touchdowns just this season.
Yeah, I did watch a lot of him last year. He does seem like a very good athlete, explosive type of player that can really bust it up and make some plays. For me, I know this might be a trendy pick, but I'm going Calvin Ridley out of Alabama. A lot of people have him as the first receiver off the board. I just think he's the most talented. I think the biggest thing, like the biggest knock on him that I was reading for other scouts was that he needs to put on some weight. Like he's a smaller receiver. He's about 6 feet, got a skinnier, like wiry build. So at the next level, corners love to press. It's just a more physical game as you get to the NFL. But I mean, you look at his stats last year. I think he's another example, kind of like Courtland Sutton, a guy who really kind of struggled with quarterbacks all year. I mean, they ended up switching it up in the championship game. So Jalen Hurts just wasn't exactly getting the job done with a run-heavy team. But he still averaged nearly almost 1,000 yards last year. Only 5 receiving touchdowns. But again, you look at the Alabama offense, most of the games they play ground and pound. They don't throw the ball entirely too much. So I think Ridley's a special talent that can separate at the next level. Okay, moving on here. So now we'll talk about guys that are maybe not at the top of everyone's board, but guys that can still make an impact at the next level. Maybe some underrated guys. Jenna, who's underrated for you as a receiver?
I would say Michael Gallup from Colorado State.
Okay.
He goes to a smaller school, so people will question whether he's able to play with top-level talent.
Right.
But he did a pretty good job when he was there.
What do you like about his game?
I like that he's very physical, and he's able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was able to watch a little bit about him last year as well, and I would agree with you. I think he can sneak into some people's draft, maybe second or third round, and really make a nice impact for some teams that need a receiver. Nick, what about you? Who do you think's underrated?
So the most underrated guy in my idea is James Washington, or in my mind is James Washington. He's only 6'1", which isn't huge by the standards of the NFL nowadays. He only ran a 4.54 40, but he's a fantastic route runner, and he put up video game numbers throughout his entire career, averaging over 20 yards a game 3 out of the 4 seasons and 16 yards a game the other year. He had 1,500 receiving yards. He's just put up ridiculous numbers at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I definitely watched a few highlights of him, and he's a solid player overall, so I think he can impact some teams as well. For me, I'm going DJ Chark out of LSU. It's kind of an interesting story for him. The first couple of years of his career, he was kind of a nobody. He didn't really do much. And then last year, he really kind of broke out as this. I mean, he was always a supreme athlete, but last year he finally got his opportunities and really showed out, in my opinion. Another example, along with Sutton and Ridley, a guy who really didn't have a good quarterback at LSU. He still managed 874 yards, 3 touchdowns. And just like Washington, really his big thing is he's explosive. He's a freak athlete. He ran a 4.34 in the 40-yard dash. When you have that kind of speed, it really translates to the NFL level very well. And just like James Washington, over 20 yards of reception as an average. So when you bring that kind of explosive playmaking to the NFL, now granted the DBs don't allow as many long balls, you don't really get as many yards per reception. But I think he can come in, maybe not get a ton of reps, but maybe be one of those game-changing guys, breaks the seam open, takes the top off the defense. So keep an eye out for him this year. Okay, wrapping it up with our final segment here. There's a lot of teams, obviously, this year that need a wide receiver. Jenna, we'll start with you. Which team do you have your eye on that must take a receiver?
Carolina Panthers, for sure. They have a lot of young receivers because they went on an overhaul last season. And I think they really need another young receiver to add to hopefully give Cam Newton a great target.
Yeah. Yeah, they got Funchess and Samuel, but as you mentioned, they're both pretty young, so they could definitely use another top-level talent because both those guys are kind of number 2 receivers, in my opinion. They don't really have a true one right now. Nick, who do you think really needs to draft a wide receiver?
So I don't necessarily think any of the contenders need a wide receiver so much. The Panthers could use one.
Right.
I mean, the Falcons could use one. A lot of these contenders could add another guy or two. But for me, the Colts, all they've got is T.Y. Hilton, and after that, it just falls off immensely. The Niners, if they could get Garoppolo a big-time receiver like Washington or Sutton or Chark or Ridley, that would be huge for them. And then also the Packers, because they added Jimmy Graham. They've still got Cobb and Adams. But if they can just add a slot guy or another explosive guy to put alongside Aaron Rodgers for a couple more years, they'll be dangerous again.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. For me, I think there's a few teams as well. For me, I look at the Ravens, the Cowboys, and the Cardinals as 3 that could really use a receiver. I know the Ravens just signed John Brown from the Cardinals, and they were able to sign Crabtree. And they still have Bashard Perriman. But in my mind, the only solid, true, proven guy out of that group is Crabtree. And I think at best he's probably a 2. He's not really a 1 on a contender team. So I think they could definitely use a big play threat down the field. A lot of those guys don't really have a lot of speed. John Brown's fast, but you need that big, dominant number 1 receiver who can just get open when you need him, and I don't really think they have that. But out of those 3 that I just listed, I think the Arizona Cardinals have the biggest need by far, and to me it's not close. Other than Larry Fitzgerald, who is in his mid-30s, their most accomplished receiver besides him on the roster at the moment is J.J. Nelson. I'm not really sure how their roster even got to this point at the wide receiver position. It's quite a disaster, to put it honestly. So I think they're really in some trouble, honestly. They need to draft a quarterback. I think they need to trade up to draft a quarterback. And at receiver, they need some dire help. So whether they're able to finesse a trade or go through free agency, any means possible, they need to find a number 2, because if you start the season with J.J. Nelson as your number 2 receiver, I think you're in a world of hurt. So we'll see what happens, but that's my pick. All right, guys, that'll just about do it for this episode of Tossin the Pigskin NFL Draft Edition. We hope you enjoyed our coverage. I'm Nate Smith, alongside Nick Frias and Jenna Ortiz. We'll see you guys next week.